You're listening to Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair professionals. This week's podcast is proudly brought to you by Penrite Oil, a better class of oil since 1926. I'm your host, Jason Owen. Today we're joined by Brendan Hughes, who is the National Training and Sales Operations Manager at Penrite. Welcome to the show, Brendan. How are you going today, mate? How's the week been for you so far?
Oh, it's been pretty good, thanks, Jason. It's a bit cold and wet over here. It's standard for the last 3 months.
It's an exciting time, and today we're talking about the past, present and future of lubricants. All right, well, let's kick it away, and let's start by saying, why was there an initial need for lubricants in the first place?
Well, from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there's been an ever-increasing need for lubricants. The popularity of the automobile began to grow in the start of the 1900s. And whilst the automotive business was relatively young, Penrite began blending its first oils.
It took off in 1900s, really, didn't it? You know, the age of the automobile, and then bang, it just exploded.
Certainly did. From 1900 onwards, we started seeing cars replacing horses, and that's when lubricants really began to grow.
And how did Penrite get involved in the lubricants?
Well, Penrite was started as a lubricant company by its founder, Les Mecoles, when he began blending oils in his parents' home in St Kilda in 1926.
In his parents' home? I got visions of him in the laundry mixing it up.
Well, the kitchen, I believe it was.
And did Penrite have any involvement with the composition of the lubricants, or was it just purely blending at that stage?
No, it was purely blending at that stage, but Penrite started business. Automotive lubricants were very basic. Most vehicles had very crude oiling systems or total loss systems. So since the early automotive days, Penrite's been operating as a lubricants company since 1926.
Wow, that's a lot of oil being mixed up, in those early days. And where did the name Penrite come from? It's always something that's intrigued me. What's the name behind that one?
Okay, the Penrite name came from, first of all, Pennsylvania crude, which at the time was the finest oil in the world you could buy, and right
so that was
introduced by Les Mecoles as the right oil for your vehicle, so hence the name became Penrite.
Oh, that's pretty standard fare. That makes perfect sense. I'll never look at the name the same again. Now I know where it's come from. And what was the story behind the creation of the brand? Was it all based off of him, or how did that story come about?
Well, Les Mecoles, the company's founder, began blending oils in his parents' house in 1926. He was only 16 at the time. He delivered his first oil by wheelbarrow to customers down the road from their house. That's their story as I've heard it. Les grew up and continued to run the company until 1979 when his health started to fail.
He sounded like an entrepreneur. He sounded like a flat-out entrepreneur. 16 and he's doing that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So he obviously learned from someone how to do it. But he ran the company until 1979 when it was bought by John Diamond Sr., who at the time was the state manager for Lubrizol, who are a major additive supplier to the oil industry. He had an extensive background in lubricants with BP, and he was a mechanical engineer for Vauxhall before that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so John and Margaret bought the company. They were the second owners of the business, and still the Diamond family run the business today.
Oh, fantastic. So it's an Aussie-owned and run business.
It's certainly an Aussie-owned, run and made business.
Oh, that's outstanding. And it just selling, obviously, in those early days to, commercial or to retail?
Mainly when they bought the business, it was selling to trade. Yes. And retail products were introduced in the 1980s.
Okay. What were the main milestones that evolved lubricants over the years? Because I know Penrite's been involved for a long time, but what were some of those main milestones, those goalposts, as we'll call them?
Well, lubricants have constantly evolved over the years. Obviously, moving from monograde oil to multi-grade oils. I think a lot of the older people might remember monograde oils being the way to go in the early 60s. But it did away with summer and winter grades of oil, which is something probably would have come from British background when we had a lot of British cars on the road.
Okay.
The introduction of additives such as detergents, dispersants, anti-wear agents improved the performance of the lubricants to do their role. And the ever-improving quality of the base oils derived from crude and non-crude sources, as well as the introduction of synthetic technology, base oils and additives, all contribute to today's modern lubricants.
Yeah, okay. And how did Penrite adapt to this? Did they move with these changes?
Yeah, well, Penrite's always adapted over the years to improving its products and ranges. So not being tied to a single supplier of technology like some other companies are, Penrite was able to utilise the latest international technology for lubricants from the world's largest additives and base oil suppliers. In
They
fact,
could move fast. Yeah.
yeah, in fact, Penrite's normally one of the first lubricant companies in Australia to make latest technologies available. And some examples of this were, Penrite was the first company in the world, apart from GM US, to have a Dextron 6 auto fluid. And it was the
Wow. Okay.
first company in Australia to update its mainstream products to API-SN. We're the first company to produce synthetic base or synthetic oils for our major ranges such as HPR 5, 10 and 15.
The fine stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, first company to have low SAP's brand in the retail market in Australia with Enviro Plus. We're the first company to have a licensed VW OEM approved retail product, Enviro
Wow.
530. First
Wow.
company to have a
Okay.
CVT fluid in retail. First company to introduce a dual action DPF cleaner for late model vehicles. First company to introduce touch screens in stores to replace books that we found were
Yes.
constantly going out of
Yeah.
date the moment they were
Yeah.
printed. So,
Yes.
so we try very much an innovative company over
Yeah.
the years, and we continue to do that.
I like the fact that, your products are your focus, right? That's what you sell, it's your bread and butter, but also the interaction with the clients and the customers and the consumers is also a high priority. I'll go back to the touchscreens in stores, the messy books. I don't think there's one car enthusiast or one person listening to this podcast at the moment who hasn't been into an auto parts store and seen a Penrite touchscreen. It kind of, they've been around for a while now and they've led the way for a long time, but my kids run up to them and they choose the oil for the car, for the family car. So, that's a game changer there, but it was one that was instigated by you guys, and I think it, speaks volumes for the brand.
Yeah.
What are lubricants?
It's probably actually not an old It's not an old technology. It's only been
No.
around for about 7 or 8 years, and we were the first ones to do it and introduce it to the retail sector, and it did away with having to have printed books and printing them, taking them out, and then people having to scroll through these books. We made it easy for people to buy the right product for their vehicle.
And easy to keep clean and stop pandemic spreading as well.
It is. And we have apps now, like for the phones, that do the same thing. So it's everyone's got a smartphone basically. So you can actually have the exact app on your phone, and it's an innovation that we introduced that hopefully sells this product down the track.
No, it's a good way of doing it. And, if you're working on a car and you've got an app in your hand, you don't have to have a book. You've got your phone. You can do it. It just makes perfect sense. But, look, what I want to do now is have a look at the lubricants per se and versus what they were back in their inception. What do they look like today? How have they changed much?
Oh, they've evolved a lot over the years, and even in the last 20 years, lubricants have evolved quite extensively.
Okay.
The main difference, if you look at lubricants, they're many and varied compared to yesteryear type products. So products manufactured before World War II were simple and crude compared to today's offerings. Actually, they were simple and crude in the 1970s compared to today's offerings. There's today what you have is tailored products for different applications. You have engine oils for engines, gearbox oils for transmissions, ATFs for autos, power steering fluids, suspension fluids, brake fluids, hydraulic fluids, and other applications, right? But they all contain different additive packs, use different base products, depending on the application. And generally their service life is a lot longer than older technology products.
Yeah. Have the materials changed? Have what you're using changed? I mean, I know there's synthetics now are prevalent everywhere, but have the base materials changed?
The base materials have changed heaps over the years. They've evolved heavily with improvements in crude oil refinement technology, such as hydroprocessing, hydrocracking of base stocks, to a point where base oils have been chemically altered and are actually considered synthetic base oil now.
Right. Oh, wow. That's huge.
Yeah.
Has the large amount of cars, and the demand, and you're saying about it being bespoke, has that forced change
Yeah, of course it has. It's the car park is so diversified at the moment, and Australia actually has a very, very diversified car park. And, we have something like about 60 or 70 brands operating
Wow.
in Australia, and a lot of models of cars. And a lot of them take different products to the next car.
Bespoke type products.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it makes it very difficult, like to sometimes to have all the products for all the vehicles that are out there.
Yeah.
But we need to fulfill as many specifications as we can. So,
It's
yeah,
I've got this vision of going into like a wine bar where there's 50 different types of gin and whiskey sitting
yeah,
behind the bar. It's a bit like that, isn't it?
yeah.
What will you have today, sir? Well, with all of those cars and all of those demands, how do you guys, do your R&D and your testing?
Okay. Because, well, we test it on vehicles, right, and in the
Yeah.
laboratory. So
Yes.
te- Penrite products are tested and licensed by industry bodies, to be the correct
Ah, rightio.
specifications.
Yep.
And the same for OEM approvals. Like if we don't have the right mix of product in there, it doesn't meet the right specifications, we won't have the OEM approvals, or we won't meet the industry standards.
Yes.
So we also test products quite heavily on our own vehicles and our
Yes.
ambassador program vehicles. Our own
Okay.
fleet sponsored vehicles, right? Some products will contract out for testing to specialised products such as additives, for
Yep.
scientific results.
Yes.
That along with testing conducted by our suppliers, make sure Penrite have the latest and best technology for their products.
Look, it's a tough one, R&D. You've got to try and move with the times, but then when you've got restrictive, movements around, the world, it makes it quite hard. And I'm tuning in to you talk about the OEM for approvals, and that I guess opens up the door for this fantastic Australian company to have great relationships overseas with international manufacturers.
Yep.
Well, let's have a bit of a look now at 2040, mate. Let's take a bit of a step forward in time. What do you think lubricants are going to look like in the future?
Okay,
I can hear you laughing. It's a real crystal ball question, isn't it?
Oh, it's one of those things. We talk about a bit. What do we need for the future
Yeah.
with cars? So we see them as being further refined than what they already are, and we'll
Right.
see things such as lower viscosity products coming in to the mainstream for vehicles. They're
Okay.
starting to do that now. Whereas we used to have a 2050 in our car, we might have a 0W8.
Wow.
So it'll be a lot.
Wow.
It'll be a lot. The oil will be a lot thinner, right? But being thinner, they use less petrol and they produce less emissions.
Okay.
So the oil will be more fuel efficient and have less effect on emissions. There'll be newer type lubricants to deal with hybrids, electrics, and even hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So we need to be looking at down the track at what's happening in those areas. So we'll continue to produce internal combustion engines, there will
Yeah.
always be a need for modern engine oil technology. So vehicle lubricants may be similar to things such as spark plugs or oil filters, where you might have a specific one for a
Yeah.
specific vehicle.
You always see changes and evolution. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where, there'll be no need for lubrication?
As long as there's a metal on metal movement, you're going to need some sort of lubrication.
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, you touched on the lower viscosities. Do you think there's still a lot of room for oil development and evolution?
Yeah, they'll continue to evolve to become better as they've constantly done through the years. Look, in the last 20 years, lubricants have evolved, as I said, quite substantially, especially in areas such as wear protection, fewer deposits, oxidation control, and things like LSPI prevention, fuel efficiency,
Yeah.
economy retention over the lifespan of
Yes.
the oil,
Yeah.
sludge formation, and even things for like idle stop protection we see in the latest API specifications.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, a lot of people don't realise probably in the area of technology, oils are probably 100% better um, at the moment in terms of specification than what they were at the start of this century. That's only
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Well, Brendan, you only have to kind of rewind the tape 20 years, like you said, and think about where we were to where we are now, it's such an exciting time in the automotive industry in terms of development and scientific leaps from forward. And you guys are at the forefront of it. And, I know your API specifications, that has just gone gangbusters in the last 20 years.
Certainly has. It's, API have updated the oil specification technology 4 times or 5 times since the start of the century.
That is stringent. That's very stringent, isn't it?
Yeah, well, interestingly, the last one from SN to SP, which started at the start of May this year, SN was around nearly 10 years. So,
Wow.
But SN technology was probably 80% better than what just 10 years previously to that was. So it's, but I said, it also evolves to look at the different technologies in cars as well. So we need to look at that. As I mentioned some things before, like LSPI prevention, which is for low-speed pre-ignition especially in small engine turbocharged vehicles. Idle stop protection for cars that have idle stop technology, shear protection, durability. People don't want to pay to have their car serviced, every 2,000 kilometres like it used to be 30 years ago. They want it every year or 6 months or depending on the vehicle. So the oils have to be able to do their job.
That brings me to the next point. Do you think we'll get non-service lubricants?
In some areas, you really already have that, like in gearboxes, differentials, transfer cases, automatic gearboxes. They have, and mechanics love this, filled for life products in them. So most
Isn't
of us
is that not just a serving suggestion? That's a serving suggestion, surely. I mean, you're going to have sludge build up at some point, wouldn't you?
Yeah, look, in some areas, inside the actual combustion engine, you're always going to have oxidation of the oil. You're going to have the oil will wear out over time. Whereas in a gearbox where you don't have the exhaust travelling through the oil in the engine internally, it can last a lot longer. And the technology's there to make it last a lot longer. But like everything, it won't last forever.
Well, of course. And look, I guess when you get to the point where it's passing it over to an enthusiast or somebody working from home, do you see lubricants maintaining that like a DIY serviceability?
Look, DIY is probably not a word normally associated with vehicle manufacturers. They have a high investment in the design and production and maintenance of their especially a vehicle warranty, and they always like their own authorised and trained personnel to maintain these vehicles. So of course you will, as vehicles become more complex, right? And especially with things such as high voltage electric systems in them, there'll certainly be less DIY friendly as time goes on.
Yeah.
But basically changing an oil in a car is done the same way it was 50 years ago. You drop the sump plug out and the oil pours out and you put it back
it's
in.
It's funny how that bit never changes. The mechanics and the workshop owners are all listening at the moment going, well, we're still back there. Some of them still got their oil catch trays for 50 years ago.
Yeah, but the smart thing is take it to an expert and get it done properly.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's not just changing the oil in the car. There's a lot of other things in the car that need servicing as well. Oil is just part of it.
Of course. Well, let's swap it up a gear, head off the road and onto the track. And I've got a very interesting question for you. Does the Penrite Racing Supercar team use special products, or are they using conventional products?
No, the Penrite, the Erebus Supercar team, they use product that comes standard off the shelf.
Really? I've always wanted to know this, whether you guys did special blends or whether they actually.
No, we actually we do use them for testing some products. Occasionally, we'll give them products to test. Lots of different things. Apart from oils and that for the car, they have a lot of other things that they use lubricants on as well. Like the rattle guns, the wheel studs, the wheel nuts, even greasing the stands that come out with the guns. So, basically, like in the actual race car, it's no secret it runs Penrite 10/10 Racing 530.
Wow.
The transaxle and gearbox runs Pro Gear 7590. The brakes, they use our 10 tenths racing brake fluid. They use our 10 tenths racing coolant as coolant. They use HPSO, power steering fluid, for the power steering in the car.
Right, there you go.
They even use our hydraulic jack oil for the internal jacks in the car. So,
well, that's a really interesting insight to know that what is being belted around those tracks, you can literally buy it and use it yourself if you need it.
Yeah, the good part is, as I said, we get a lot of feedback from them as well, which is great for us. So not only on the engine, the gearbox, to know are they having wear issues? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? So it's they're a great source of information. But they're one of our people we sponsor. We also do the same thing with Honda with motorcycles, because obviously we sponsor the Honda racing team. For the off-road team, we sponsor the superbike team, and they all use off-the-shelf products as well.
Well, Brendan, I would think there's probably a very good reason why, because if you're that consistent with your products you're offering and teams are doing so well, like teams like Erebus, it's only natural that moths to a flame, others will come knocking on your door saying, hey, can you help us out as well? Okay, let's start to head towards the back door of the garage, and I've got a final question for you, which is always an interesting one. What's one fact the mechanics don't often know about Penrite?
Oh,
come on, give us a juicy one. Give us a good one.
Well, one of the facts, I think it's not just mechanics. I think it's everybody out there. People think that we're a US company, and we're actually 100% Australian owned and operated.
100%.
100%, right?
Well, I can hear your accent. You're definitely ticking the Australian box, so we know
we certainly are, and it's something we're very proud of. And we actually manufacture here in Australia. A lot of people say, "Oh, you buy your oil in somewhere else." We don't. We actually blend it right here in Dandenong in Victoria, in Crestmead in Queensland. So we have 2 blending plants, and that's where we blend nearly all of our
94
oils.
years as well. That's another thing. 94 years you've been cracking on with this. That is phenomenal. Well, look, thank you very much for coming on the show today, Brendan. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and it's been a great insight into the Penrite brand. And if any of our listeners have any follow-up questions about anything we've discussed, they can go ahead and reach out to Penrite via the Mechanic.com.au community. If you're not already a member of Mechanic.com.au, join the thousands of other mechanics around Australia who are earning, learning and networking more at Mechanic.com.au, the home of Australia's mechanics, by creating a free account today. Thanks for tuning into the Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair professionals. If you want to unlock a whole host of trade-only resources, including our private community, competitions, educational content, job opportunities, training, troubleshooting, and much, much more, go ahead and create a free account now at Mechanic.com.au. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Mechanic.com.au podcast soon.